I'm excited to welcome you here to this session, The Great Debate, Universal Secondary Education versus Alternate Pathways. My name is Boris Bulayev. I'm the CEO and co-founder of Educate, and I want to provide a brief introduction to the session before I pass it along to our participants, including our 3 virtual members. So the goal of today's session is to further center the conversation on how do we actually achieve universal post-primary education for all. I should note that I'm not using the word secondary because secondary is one form of post-primary, and while it is the dominant one, it doesn't necessarily have to be our only way to get there. At Educate, after 10 years of focusing purely on making secondary education prepare youth with the skills to succeed in today's labor market, we began to think about what about those who are not in secondary, and how long will it take to get everyone access? We quickly came across young women like Esther, who said that my parents were not able to afford school fees to pay for secondary school, so I dropped out of school. After staying home doing nothing, I opened a vegetable vending business, which failed because I had 0 skills in business. Exploring this question, you stumble upon some tough stats. The most comprehensive one states that the upper secondary out-of-school rate for low-income countries is 61%, compared to 8% for high-income countries. What this means is that a majority of students don't complete secondary. The stat that resonated for me most is that only 1 in 20 rural girls in much of Africa complete secondary. What this also means is we have a major opportunity to further leverage and take advantage of this large youth population to advance development. There is a hugely underutilized pool of human capital. Should we be thinking more creatively about how to unlock this potential? There are a lot of factors that lead to the current state of the world, including legacy colonial structures, but pure resources is a major one. It raises the question of whether, when pursuing the right to universal access to education and building the workforce of the 21st century, does using only our current tool of academic secondary, a relatively expensive form of education, actually lead to an inequitable and more unjust outcome in the end? Today, I want to have a real conversation about how we achieve universal access to post-primary for all, and ask whether we should be thinking differently about how to achieve it. We have a great group of individuals together, and so I'll ask them to briefly give a one-sentence introduction to themselves, and then we'll kick off with questions. Can we start with the virtual participants? Dzingai, would you like to go first?
Yeah, my name is Dzingai Mutumbuka. I have had many incarnations in my life. I fought in the liberation struggle in Zimbabwe. I became the first Minister of Education. I worked at the World Bank with my colleague here, Patrinos. And since retiring, in inverted marks, I'm still very active in education, sitting on several boards, too many to mention.
Harry?
Hello, honored to be here. Harry Patrinos, practice manager for education for Europe and Central Asia at the World Bank. I've focused my career looking at the outcomes of education, especially in the labor market. Thank you.
Maryanne?
Hello, everyone. Maryanne Ochola, the head of programs and partnerships at Shujaaz, Inc. This is a network of social ventures based in Nairobi, catering to 15 to 24-year-olds based in Kenya and Tanzania, and currently reaching 9.5 million of them to break down barriers so they can take control of their future.
Rob?
My name's Robert Jenkins. I'm the Global Director of Education for UNICEF.
Yes, it's a pleasure to join you today. My name is Meghan, and I'm the Associate Director of Education and Adolescent Empowerment for BRAC International.
Dzingai, so I wanted to start with you. You've been an education minister, a prominent figure in international education for a long time, and have interacted with lots of education ministers. What perspective has your experience given you on this question?
Yeah, I could spend the whole day talking about this, but basically, post-primary education in Africa today is failing African students. It's failing African students in the sense that it is not really preparing them for the world of work. If we are really to focus on this segment of education, we have to completely rewrite the script, because at the moment, it is not serving African education. And I've got my friend here with me, Harry Patrinos, who has talked really about the returns to education. And if you look at the returns to education, post-primary education in Africa, as it now conducted, there are virtually no returns to post-primary education. More particularly, I'm worried about the segment that you have talked about, those who are out of school, the ones that Maryanne and other people are focusing on, because it's a huge segment of the African population, people who either did not have the fundamental skills to continue with their education, or people who just simply dropped out because of lack of means to continue their education. So my thrust is that we really need to rethink secondary education. And Educator, of course, has done some of the very interesting work that point to the future of this kind of preparation that we need to undertake if Africa is to derive the youth dividend from its enormous youth population.
Thank you, Dzingai. Rob, we know UNICEF has been advocating for an approach that achieves SDG 4 in multiple pathways, not just focusing on formal academic secondary. How do we elevate alternate pathways to have a greater share of the post-primary market and enrollment? And what would you say are the qualities government should look for when building these pathways so that they have better traction?
Well, thanks. I'll build on my friend Dzingai's comments. I think the bigger question I'd be interested to hear from fellow panelists and others is, are we looking for the future to strengthen the existing model, meaning incremental change that we've been working on for a long, long time, or more, I think, what I'm hearing from Dzingai, which is it's time for a transformation or any other big word you can think of, restructuring, a completely new approach. I think I tend to be more in the second category, and it's just recognizing the statistics and the data is the current system around the world is failing. High income, low income, particularly in low income and fragile contexts, but also in high income contexts. I come from Canada. I don't think there's much to be proud of in our current Canadian secondary school system. So what would that look like? I think it's around multiple learning pathways. I mean, we spend a lot of time in the education sector categorizing kids. You're in the formal sector, the non-formal, informal, vocational. And these are pigeonholes to kids and youth that you can't often get out of. You start at 12, 13, 14, and you're either in that stream and you drop out, or you're in that stream until you... So one is multiple learning pathways that are fluid, and they recognize the different changing context of children and of youth, their different interests, their different contexts, and they can move around. They all need to be high quality, they all need to be certified. If we do move out into multiple learning pathways, we got to be very careful. The advantaged don't have high quality certified and others have elsewise. So multiple learning pathways, very dynamic, breaking down four walls of the school into in and out of real life and continue to be certified. And I think micro-credentials, I think there's a whole new ways that we can access certified learning for children and youth that are really exciting. I think, unfortunately, actors like the UN system, like myself, ministries of education, all the kind of stakeholders, teachers, unions, etc., make such a radical transformation quite challenging. So I think it is time for us to reset.
Thank you, Rob. Maryanne, I know Shujaaz has a deep pulse on 9.5 million youth in Kenya and Tanzania. Given this deep connection to youth voices, what are your thoughts on this question, and what do you think the perspective of youth who can't access secondary would be?
Yeah, so we've been working for a decade, really listening to young people, and the biggest challenge they tell us they face is cruel optimism. This idea that they were told, go to school, work really hard, get a certificate, you will get a formal job. The reality couldn't be further from that. 90% of young people finishing school today in Kenya are going to have to contend with earning a livelihood in the informal sector. Yet, our education system is built around a formal sector. So what we as Shujaaz Inc. have really taken the bull by the horns and developed an alternative pathway to these young people. We developed something called the Hustler MBA, which is peer-to-peer learning, because young people do not trust us adults anymore because we've told them over the course of time, and this hasn't worked. So they're listening to each other. They're role modeling their experiences. They're going out there in the world with hard and soft skills that they have learned from each other through this. And really that's what we are advocating, that while we work on the structural piece, we need immediate alternative pathways because that unlocks other impacts, delayed marriages, delayed childbirth, use of contraception, and a whole lot of others built around livelihoods.
Thank you, Maryanne. Harry, you've done a lot of research on the returns to education. I was hoping you could speak to what we know about the returns to secondary education, and what would you need to see to make the case that an alternative generates comparable improvements and outcomes or yields better value for money?
Thanks, Boris. I think on this question, it's abundantly clear that the returns to education overall are high given the tremendous expansion we've seen throughout the world. But they're not equally high. The highest returns to education around the world are for higher education, tertiary education. This is followed by primary education, and the lowest returns we see are at the secondary level. And this is because secondary education is also the ticket for higher education. So those graduates of the secondary system are able to go to tertiary. Given that our sector is sequential, you need primary for secondary, secondary for tertiary. One of the benefits of secondary is that you can go to higher education. So those people that are good at taking tests, because it is a selection exam to get into secondary, to get into higher education. So for those of you that don't get a high quality secondary education, they are going to be in the situation that fellow panelists talked about just now. So the problem is the way we divide the education system at the secondary level. We have academic or general education, we have vocational and technical education, and these paths are not equal in most countries. Due to the selection exams, we know that those who end up in vocational are those who didn't do as well in the exams. They tend to come from lower socioeconomic status. And these are, this is the sector that may, if it works, give you a job, give you high earnings to begin with, but you're quickly overtaken by other segments of the education system. And it tends to put you in jobs that may or may not exist in the future. So publicly provided pre-employment standalone vocational education is not usually effective in the labor market. And this is due to the quality of primary education and the limited opportunities. So I echo fellow panelists who talk about alternative pathways to get around this problem. These are viable options, but they depend on underlying economic conditions, the institution's history, and so on, and difficult to break this, the system. One thing we do have is information. The more information we can give, the better the choices that could be. But the constraints are the existing system with the exam-based selection and these entrenched subsectors of the secondary system. What do we need to go forward? We need programs, we need alternatives for people, we need evidence about the success of those programs that show that it can be done through alternative means, whether it's the approaches that people talked about, educate, or other alternative pathways. But the trick is to get the evidence out there on what works and for whom.
Thank you, Harry. Meghan, through the ELA program, BRAC has had some phenomenal results for really marginalized adolescent girls who generally don't have access to secondary. Can you share more about that, kind of the perspective of the young girls you serve and how your success informs your thoughts on this topic?
Yes, absolutely. Thank you. At BRAC, we believe that the sound of hope echoes in the agency and confidence of a young girl's voice. Our empowerment and livelihoods for adolescent programs are built with and from community strengths in order to make them more sustainable. We have several key elements that are part of our skilling programs that we have found to be most impactful. I think another key before I describe would be that, intergenerational poverty is multidimensional, and there isn't a one-size-fits-all solution to the challenges, the unprecedented challenges at the moment that especially youth in Africa and young girls face in terms of early marriage, food insecurity, a lack of ability to continue with schooling. So our ELA programs address structural barriers through a variety of multidimensional means, and this is elements of social empowerment, which include connection to peer networks, mentors who are near peers and can relate to the girls and build that aspect of trust, which is so important in youth programming, sexual and reproductive health that allows more confidence in decision making. As a component of the social empowerment, also social learning opportunities. So building these safe spaces in communities that don't have the same physical or dangers that often girls face on the way to a program. So the communities are involved in this. The second critical component of our programming is economic empowerment. So we work to ensure that financial literacy and how to save and use money, in addition to actual livelihood and skilling opportunities that are aligned with market assessments that really reflect the needs of that context. And then we connect our girls at the older level to microfinance opportunities so that they're able to immediately move the skills that they've learned into actual livelihoods. Another aspect is critical that it is linked to education. So our programs also ensure that we provide the resources and support for girls who are in school to remain in school, and those that may have dropped out to have a pathway back to formal schooling so that it's not a separate component. We have seen demonstrable impact across many contexts. We've been evaluating this model over the past 15 years. And so in an RCT that was conducted in Uganda, we saw a 48% increase in girls who are engaged in income-generating activities, and almost a 40% decrease after 4 years in early marriage and cohabitation. We've also seen that, of course, the impacts of COVID school closures. We measured this program in Sierra Leone during the Ebola crisis, and we saw that it had a huge impact on girls' continued engagement despite school closures, and also in conflict-affected countries such as South Sudan. So we believe essentially that there isn't one answer, but that the answer needs to be the lived questions of the communities in which we work, also linked to ministries of education. So we've also linked these programs to after-school components.
Okay.
Thanks.
We're going to go faster for one rapid round of questions before we jump into questions from the audience. Dzingai, maybe in 1 minute, what would you say is the future you envision 30 years from now?
I envision a future of chaos unless we change the current system of education and training. Really, the basics for me are the following. What's the purpose of education? The purpose of education is to prepare young people for healthy and productive lives. We cannot say that at the moment we are delivering on their mission. And as people have said, particularly if you look at the work that Harry has done, returns to education are higher than those of the stock market, but the quality matters. Emphasis on girls matters. Starting early matters. Quality, 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 and relevance. And so I think that 30 years from now, if we do not change direction, we are confronting chaos, particularly in sub-Saharan Africa, which is supposed to have the biggest number of young people in the world by that time.
Great. Thank you, Dzingai. Rob, what would you say is the role of technology in creating alternate pathways?
I think we do have unprecedented tools now. It's not the silver bullet. I agree with my colleague from BRAC. There's not one solution that's going to solve all problems, and technology is often flagged as that. We have to be careful, but I think there's enormous potential. There's great examples of technology being used at scale to certify multiple learning pathways, provide access to high quality, world-class education to those who didn't have it before. So I think indeed it will play an increasing important role in the future.
Okay. Maryanne, I know you're building and learning as you go. What would you say are the two biggest lessons you found about what's working and what's not?
So I think what I would say is that we need to meet young people where they are. I think we have too many efforts and programs that are trying to pull young people out of the informal sector into formal platforms, formal structures. I think what we've learned is we meet them where they are, whether that's a platform that takes account of affordability of data, whether that's a platform that takes into consideration what Meghan was saying, that girls need safe spaces and female role models so they can feel safe, whether that's a platform that considers agency in addition to training, whether that's, for example, taking alternative data sets, like young people that help other young people. Can those be role models that we elevate in communities for them to then be peer trainers, peer moderators? So meeting young people where they are. That's the first thing that we've learned. The second thing that we've learned is that the role of disempowering narratives around alternative pathways, around the informal sector. We also need to retell that story even as we build these alternative pathways, because society still has an idea of success that's limiting young people, and it's not really linked to our reality today.
Thank you. Harry, why doesn't the bank support countries to do dual education in the way that happens in certain European countries? As I know that's often something that's advocated for in this topic.
Yeah, thanks, Boris. By dual education, you mean the systems that Austria, Germany, Switzerland have perfected. I think the difficulty in implementing or replicating this elsewhere is that the other countries don't have that history of the system. The German system goes back 800 plus years with institutions and laws that have been put in place. We can do pilots of dual education systems, and they will work, but to change the whole secondary system to one that replicates the dual education model is very, very difficult. I think the German, Austrian systems are based also on a foundation of very high quality education. So I agree with Dzingai. Without the quality at the base, it's very difficult to do anything useful at the secondary level. So the challenge for many developing countries is to continue to improve the base and early investments in girls, investments in the quality of education, making sure that learning outcomes improve. And also, given the current context in most of the countries in the developing world, to have the strict division between academic and vocational doesn't serve anyone very well. We do need, even within the formal education system, the ability for people to go back and forth, to continue to get the comprehensive education in addition to the skills of the labor market. Those can be done through partnership private sector. It doesn't have to be the formal dual education system, but it could be apprenticeships. It could be a bigger role for employers in the system, private sector, and community initiatives. the dual education, I'm afraid, won't be replicated in other countries anytime soon.
Thank you. Meghan, what would you say are the top 1 or 2 priority areas of improvement to build more models like ELA?
Great question. I think to echo the sentiments of colleagues and make sure that just because a girl misses one step, it doesn't take them completely off the pathway to the future. It would be integrated development. So making sure that we do consider, the market needs, and we listen to young women and also youth about the type of livelihoods that are relevant, and continue to sustain their own enthusiasm, because I think often when there's not a safe space, especially for young girls, there stops being that hope to continue forward towards skilling or formal school. So really ensuring that we listen to youth and also take their priorities and their voice into account in our planning, so that it's not a separated thing. And also the integrated development piece that we're also linking to microfinance, livelihoods, and also really focusing on the agricultural sector, which is often ignored in planning.
Okay, thank you. So I think we have about 5 minutes. The organizers told me there's a big aim to get everyone into the plenary at 3:40. So just wanted to open up to see if anyone has questions for any of the participants.
There's one behind you.
So please. Oh. Yes, the magic microphone.
Thanks. I think my question, so I can't disagree with anything anyone on the panel said, and the enthusiasm has been really inspirational, so thank you. I think my question is about alignment in systems, and if, like Rob, you were saying, girls or children could weave in and out different pathways, I guess my challenge would be is that feasible? In my country and in many countries, we don't have the data and we don't have the ability to do that. So how reasonable is that as a vision, I guess is my question, just feasibility. Thanks.
I think all evidence is to the contrary. You're dead right, because we're stuck. I mean, it's all failing. And so I hear why I'm optimistic is I think if there's going to be any secret sauce of multiple learning pathways that are more dynamic, it's more frequent markers. So more micro credentialing. So if I pass this step, I'm successful, then I can move this way, then move back. It's I think where we're struggling, and I think my colleague from the World Bank was talking about these high stake exams after 4 years, and you get nothing if you don't make it to the full 4 years, and then you pass or you fail. So I do think, and we have some countries with dynamic leadership that are indeed introducing far more markers for progress, which are showing great promise. But I'm with you on the big question. Overall, the data is showing we have a long, long ways to go.
Hi, can you hear me if I shout? Is that okay? Hi, my name's Samantha from Link Education. We do a program very similar to the one BRAC was talking about in Malawi. And totally agree with everything that everyone has said and what the last question was on as well. To access these alternative pathways, which do sound amazing, the children will need the self-confidence, more self-confidence, in order to be able to access them. So where does the panel think, where is the place for social emotional learning to come into the mainstream curriculum so these children can access these alternative pathways?
Yeah, I think that is the question that really remains, and that often doesn't link all of the pathways that we're speaking to. And I believe if our programs are similar, whether we're calling it social emotional learning or soft skills, it's a critical component to ensure that the confidence is built. One way that I do see that being taken forward is, again, through mentors. I think that's kind of a critical bridge from a traditional program or a non-traditional program into actual sustainable livelihoods and a future. So I see mentors and continuing to invest money in really effectively training and building the capacity of mentors and teachers, which I think is one opportunity.
I do want to just flag, I think another key area maybe for all of us to work together on is measurement of social emotional learning and measurement of social emotional health. I think as long as it's so easy to count math and English but social emotional is this kind of touchy-feely abstract, we're going to struggle. And I think there is some really exciting work going around measurement of effectiveness of social emotional programs, social emotional learning programs. That can help a long ways.
Thank you. Over here, and feel free to jump in with disagreements as well.
Yeah, we're supposed to be debating. We all agree. It's kind of
maybe let's take the microphone over here, and then we can go to Ann in the back.
Thank you. So, building on the question that was asked before, we have examples from several countries, let's say the Philippines, Mexico, for the last 20 years, flexibilizing their systems of multiple flexible pathways with certification equivalencies. Yet the problem when we try to do that in other countries is that the communities perceive this education, even when it's good quality, as second-class education. Therefore, we don't have community support. The communities are not empowered to demand quality of these modalities. And on the other hand, the governments don't always have the resources to properly integrate these modalities, and donors are not interested always in supporting this. So how can we engage donors and communities? Because I do think many ministers of education across the world do see this is the future, and the youth see this is the future, but their parents and donors are not necessarily there. So some thoughts on that would be welcome. Thank you.
Dzingai and Harry, would you guys have any thoughts on this topic?
I just want to endorse what my colleagues have said, particularly the issue of measurement. Because in education, we do not really do enough evaluations. We undertake many pilots and experiments, but we never measure what works for who. Robert has talked about technology. Yes, technology is very, very good, but what actually works in technology? Where is the evidence? I think that if we are going to tackle this problem, we need to start working in terms of evidence. What works, what does not work, and why does it work, for whom, at what cost? All these questions are fundamental if we are going to solve this problem.
Yeah, I agree with Dzingai. It is a question of measurement, information, and especially the dissemination of the information. Going back to the question from the audience about the parents' wishes, I think that they think this is important to understand, and I think parents are right to question changes without information about why we're doing it and what is going to happen. So. These efforts to bring in some change to the system have to be accompanied by real evidence of what the options are and what the evidence suggests. And it is a question of not only is the program working overall, but who's it working for, like Dzingai says. So it can't be one or the other. It has to be choices. It has to be a system that allows the kind of movement that Rob mentioned, that doesn't tie people into something. I think this is the key, and many of these programs that people talked about today, I don't think get the attention they deserve. So we do need to disseminate more. But the measurement issue is huge. I mean, to look at what's happened the last 2 years because of the school closures. We have information from only a handful of countries on actual learning losses. So we're not even measuring the biggest threat to education that is taking place today. So measurement issues really needs to rise in the agenda priorities if we really want to improve the system, or as some people have said, to transform the system.
No, we're at time. Maryanne, there's something you wanted to add?
Yeah, now to the second question around agency and confidence, I wanted to, back that up with the power of storytelling. Because what we've seen is that the people that sign up for our alternative pathways come through our storytelling multimedia platform, where we tell stories of young people who are actually out there learning, and it's making a change in their lives. So that motivation and confidence as agency is what then leads young people to sign up for this alternative, Hustler MBA. Then to the question around the measurement, absolutely. We just want to underscore the power of measuring as we go along and tweaking, because we are building as we fly. And we've done some work with UNICEF in East and South Africa Regional Office, testing how many adolescent girls were out of school because of COVID in particular, and how many of those have been able to earn a living, no matter how minuscule, as a result of some of these, skills. So absolutely, measurement has to be a part of it as we build.
Thank you, everyone. I know it's time to run the plenary. I want to appreciate everyone for joining, and hopefully this is the beginning of a conversation to come.